I told my boss she was impossible to work with at exactly 11:47 p.m. Under the cold white lights of our empty office, the words slipped out before I could stop them. They hung between us like smoke. She didn't flinch. Of course she didn't. Elena Ward never flinched. She just stood there in her charcoal suit, sleeves rolled to her elbows, red pen still in her hand from tearing apart my presentation for the third time that night. "If you can't handle high standards," she said calmly, "you're in the wrong department." Her voice was steady. Mine wasn't. "I can handle standards," I shot back. "What I can't handle is feeling like I'll never be enough for you." The silence that followed felt dangerous. The city lights flickered through the glass walls behind her. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator dinged, reminding us we were completely alone. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint tremble in her breath, the first crack in her perfect armor. "You think this is about being enough?" she whispered. And before I could respond, before I could even breathe, she grabbed my collar and kissed me. Hard, desperate, and suddenly, nothing in my carefully organized world made sense anymore. For a long moment, neither of us moved, her lips pulled away slowly, and the silence that replaced them was louder than anything she had ever said to me across a conference table. I watched her step back, one step, then two, until the edge of her desk stopped her. She set the red pen down, very carefully, the way someone sets something down when their hands are shaking and they don't want you to notice. I noticed. "Elena, don't." Her voice was barely above a whisper. She turned toward the window, arms folding across her chest like a shield she'd forgotten to put on sooner. I stood there in the middle of our empty office, tie loosened, presentation scattered across the floor between us, trying to remember how to breathe normally. Outside, the city hummed along without us, indifferent, glittering, alive. I should have walked out. That would have been the smart thing to do. Instead, I started picking up the scattered pages of my presentation from the floor, one by one, slowly. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because I needed something to do with my hands. Maybe because I wasn't ready for that moment to end. She watched me from the window without turning around. I could see her reflection in the dark glass. That careful, composed face. Except her eyes, in the reflection, her eyes looked tired in a way I had never noticed before. Not the tired of long working hours. Something older than that. "You've had that presentation for 2 weeks," she said finally, her voice returning to its usual measured tone. "Almost. The third slide still doesn't align with the quarterly projections." I looked up at her. "Really?" I said. "That's what you want to talk about right now?" The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one I had ever seen on Elena Ward's face during office hours. Something shifted in my chest without my permission. "Go home," she said quietly. "We'll review the rest in the morning." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my ceiling and replayed everything. Not just the kiss, but everything before it. The past 4 months of working under her. The way she corrected my reports without explanation, expecting me to understand her logic intuitively. The way she stayed later than everyone else without asking anyone to match her hours, yet somehow made you feel guilty if you left on time. The way she took her coffee black, never spoke about weekends, and once stared at a framed company photo on the wall for a full 30 seconds before walking away without a word. I had filed all of those moments under impossible and moved on. But lying there in the dark, I began pulling each one back out, re-examining them, holding them up to a different light. The late-night glances I had caught across the office, when she didn't know I was watching, that had always seemed to carry something heavier than evaluation. The afternoon she had quietly approved my leave request the same day my father was hospitalized, without asking a single question, when she could have easily demanded documentation first. The way she had once paused behind my desk for just a moment too long, reading something on my screen, and I had felt the warmth of her presence before I heard her walk away. Cracks. Tiny. Barely visible cracks in a wall I had assumed was solid all the way through. "What I can't handle is feeling like I'll never be enough for you." I winced at my own words in the darkness. Because as I said them, in that charged, breathless moment, I had meant more than professionalism. I had meant more than work, and somehow, some part of me suspected she had understood exactly what I meant, which was perhaps why she had answered the way she did, not with words. She was impossible to read, impossible to reach, impossible to stop thinking about. And, as the city outside my window slowly softened into early morning light, I realized with a quiet, unsettling certainty, I had stopped wanting to keep my distance a long time ago. We never talked about it. Monday morning arrived with the same fluorescent lighting, the same conference calls, the same stack of revision notes left on my desk in her handwriting, red ink, precise margins. Not a single word out of place. I sat down, read through her notes, and told myself this was fine. It was not fine. The first sign that something had shifted came on Tuesday afternoon. I was at the whiteboard during a team briefing, walking everyone through the revised quarterly projections, the ones she had torn apart on Friday night. I had fixed the third slide. I had fixed everything, actually, spending most of Saturday rebuilding the entire framework from scratch. She sat at the head of the table, coffee in hand, expression unreadable as always. When I finished, the room waited for her response with the particular tension that always accompanied Elena Ward's evaluations. She had a reputation for finding the one flaw in an otherwise perfect presentation, the way a surgeon finds a nerve. Precisely, and without apology, she looked at the whiteboard for a long moment. "It's clean," she said simply. 2 words. From Elena, that was practically a standing ovation. My colleague Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Did she just compliment you?" With the expression of someone witnessing a solar eclipse. I kept my face neutral. But when I glanced toward the head of the table, she was looking down at her coffee, and the very tips of her ears had gone slightly pink. I looked away before she could catch me smiling. By Wednesday, something new had entered our dynamic. Something I didn't have a professional word for. She stopped leaving revision notes on my desk and started delivering them in person. She would appear beside me without warning, lean over my shoulder to point at something on my screen, and explain her reasoning in that low, quiet voice she used when it was just the 2 of us. No performance, no audience. "You're burying your strongest argument in the footnotes again," she said on Wednesday afternoon, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume. Something clean and understated, like her. "Some things are better when you have to look for them," I said without thinking. A pause. "Is that so?" she said. Not a question. More like she was turning the words over carefully, deciding what to do with them. Just a personal philosophy. I added innocently. She straightened up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a small, unguarded gesture I had never seen from her before, and walked back to her office without another word. But she was almost smiling. I was almost certain of it. Thursday brought a rainstorm and a broken elevator. We stood side by side in the stairwell on the 11th floor, waiting for maintenance, listening to rain hammer the windows. The rest of the floor had cleared out early due to the weather. It was just the 2 of us and the sound of water against glass. "You fixed more than the 3rd slide," she said, out of nowhere. I turned to look at her. "The entire structural logic," she continued, eyes on the rain-streaked window. "You rebuilt it. You didn't have to do that. You told me to go home and review it in the morning," I said. "I reviewed it on Saturday instead." She glanced at me sideways. "You spent your Saturday on a work presentation." "I spent my Saturday proving a point, to me, to myself," I said. Then, after a beat mostly, something passed across her face, quiet and warm and gone almost before I could name it. We stood in silence for a while after that. A comfortable silence, which felt like a small miracle given everything. Then, just as the elevator dinged its return, she spoke so quietly I almost missed it. "There's something you don't know about me," she said. "Something that would explain a lot." I turned to her immediately, but the elevator doors slid open, and 2 maintenance workers stepped off with their equipment, filling the stairwell with noise and movement. She straightened. The wall went back up, smooth and seamless. "Good night," she said professionally, and walked away. I stood there in the stairwell, rain against the windows, heart loud in my chest, knowing I had just been standing at the edge of something enormous, and she had pulled back before we could fall in. I gave her space for exactly 4 days. Then, on Monday evening, I knocked on her office door at 8 p.m., when the floor had emptied and the cleaning crew had already come and gone, and I asked her if she wanted coffee. She looked up from her desk, studied me for a moment the way she studied quarterly reports, carefully, looking for the thing that didn't add up. "From the machine down the hall," she asked. "From the place on the corner," I said. "I had them make yours black, no sugar. Exactly the way you make it impossible for the intern to get right every single morning." A pause then. Almost against her will, it seemed. She laughed. A small, real, unguarded laugh that lasted exactly 3 seconds before she caught herself. But those 3 seconds were the most human I had ever seen her. "Sit down," she said quietly. We drank our coffee in the low lamplight of her office. The city sprawled quietly behind her through the floor-to-ceiling glass. She had her hands wrapped around the cup the way people do when they need something warm to hold on to. I didn't push. I had learned, over these past weeks, that pushing Elena Ward produced walls. Patience produced something far more interesting. It took about 20 minutes of quiet, easy conversation about nothing in particular. The upcoming client review, the forecast for the quarter, whether the office coffee machine was genuinely broken or simply punishing us. Before the air between us changed, she set her cup down. "I was engaged," she said, simply, without preamble. The way she delivered difficult information in board meetings, clean and direct, because dragging it out only made it worse. I didn't speak, I just listened. 3 years ago. She looked at the window rather than at me. He was a senior partner at the firm where I worked before this. Brilliant, charming, the kind of person everyone in the room gravitates toward. A quiet breath. I thought I understood him completely. She paused. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup slowly. He had been taking credit for my work for over a year before I found out. Presentations I built, strategies I developed. He would refine them just enough to put his name on them. And she stopped, pressed her lips together. I trusted him, professionally, personally, entirely. The word entirely landed heavily in the quiet room. When I confronted him, she continued. He told the partners I had been the one misrepresenting contributions, that I was unstable, emotional. The last word carried a faint edge, not anger exactly, but something that had once been anger and had since hardened into something quieter and more permanent. I lost the position. I lost the professional relationships I had spent 6 years building. And I lost. She paused for just a moment. I lost the ability to trust my own judgment about people. The room was very still, I understood then. All of it. Every red pen mark, every impossible standard, every wall and distance and cold, measured word. It wasn't cruelty. It had never been cruelty. It was a woman who had been burned so completely that she had decided the only safe way to move through the world was to remain untouchable. Her perfectionism wasn't about control. It was about survival. "Elena," I said carefully. She finally looked at me. And in the lamplight of that quiet office, I saw something in her expression that she had never once allowed in a meeting room, or a hallway, or a crowded elevator. Something exhausted and honest and achingly human. "You're not him," I said. "And I'm not going anywhere." Her jaw tightened slightly, the way it does when someone is holding something together by sheer will. "You don't know that," she whispered. "I know enough," I said. She looked at me for a long, searching moment. The city glittered patiently behind her. Then she picked up her coffee cup, looked down at it, and said very quietly, "The presentation for Thursday. I think it's the strongest work you've done since you joined the team." It wasn't "I believe you." But from Elena Ward at that particular moment, in that particular silence, it was close enough to make my chest ache. The rumor started on a Wednesday. I don't know who saw what, or when exactly the whispers began threading themselves through the office, like smoke under a closed door. But by Wednesday afternoon, I could feel it, the way conversations paused half a second too long when I walked into a room. The way Marcus looked at me over his monitor, with an expression that was 1 part concern and 2 parts I need to know everything. I stopped by his desk at lunch. "Tell me," I said. He leaned forward. "People are talking about you and Ward." I kept my face very still. "People talk about everyone. This is different." He lowered his voice. "Donovan from the board was in the building last Friday evening. Late. He apparently saw the 2 of you through the glass." He paused meaningfully. It didn't look like a standard performance review. The coffee I had been holding suddenly felt very heavy. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere had shifted in the way that office atmospheres shift when something invisible has changed. Everyone sensing it, no one naming it directly. Elena moved through the floor with her usual precision, but I caught something different in the set of her shoulders. A stillness that wasn't composure. The kind of stillness that comes just before something breaks. She called me into her office at 10 a.m. The door clicked shut behind me. She was standing at the window with her back to me, arms folded. The city was gray and overcast beyond the glass. She didn't turn around immediately, and in that pause, I felt the temperature of the room drop by several degrees. "Donovan has requested a meeting with HR," she said. "Apparently, there are concerns about professional boundaries within the team." Her voice was perfectly level. That frightened me more than if it had shaken. "Elena, I want you to know," she said, turning now, "that I will handle this. I will ensure your position here is not affected. Whatever is said in that meeting, I will make it clear that any irregularity in conduct was entirely my responsibility." I stared at her. "You're going to take the blame for something that belongs to both of us." "I'm going to protect my team member," she said, firmly. Finally. The mask fully back in place, edges sealed. "Is that all I am to you right now?" I asked. "A team member?" Something flickered across her face. Fast and unguarded, then gone. "It's all you can be," she said quietly. "Here, in this building. Under these circumstances." She pulled away completely after that. No more evening coffees. No more quiet conversations over lamplight. No more standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence while she pointed at something on my screen. She returned to pure, clean professionalism. Sharp and deliberate and devastating in its thoroughness. She was doing it perfectly, of course, because Elena Ward did everything perfectly, including, it turned out, the art of making someone feel invisible in a room she was standing in. I threw myself into work. What else was there to do? I stayed late, rebuilt 2 client strategies from the ground up, and submitted everything before deadlines without being asked. If she was going to retreat to professionalism, then I would meet her there. I would be so undeniably good at my job that no one in that building, not Donovan, not HR, not anyone, could frame what existed between us as anything other than a working relationship that had produced exceptional results. It worked, professionally. It did not work personally, because late one Thursday evening, I passed her office and saw her through the glass, sitting at her desk in the lamplight, still and quiet, one hand pressed flat against a closed folder, staring at nothing, not reviewing, not correcting, not performing competence for an invisible audience, just sitting, alone, in a silence that looked heavy enough to drown in. Her other hand, resting in her lap, was trembling. I stopped walking. She looked up and found me through the glass. For 3 full seconds, neither of us moved. Then she reached over and lowered the blinds, slowly, deliberately. But not before I saw it. The thing she would never say out loud in a conference room or a performance review or a meeting with HR. Her eyes were wet. "If this moment would break your heart too, you're not alone. Like and subscribe, because this story isn't over yet." I walked back to that office at midnight, not because I had a plan, not because I knew what I was going to say or how she would receive it. I walked back because I had spent the last hour sitting in my car in the parking garage, staring at the steering wheel, and I had arrived at a simple, quiet conclusion. I was not willing to let her disappear behind those blinds and call it an ending. The floor was empty. The lights were on their overnight setting, low and amber, casting long shadows between the desks. My footsteps were the only sound. Her office light was still on, visible as a thin gold line beneath the closed blinds. I knocked. Silence, then. "We're closed." It was such an unexpectedly dry thing to say that I almost laughed despite everything. "I'm not a customer," I said through the door. Another silence. Longer this time. Then the soft sound of her chair and footsteps, and the door opened. She had taken her jacket off. Her hair, usually immaculate, had been pushed back loosely. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and something she was working very hard to keep unnamed. "It's midnight," she said. "I know. You should be home." I said. I came back. She studied me for a moment. Then she stepped aside and let me in. She sat on the edge of her desk. I stood near the window. The city spread out behind me, quiet and vast. We were back in the same room where everything had started, and the air between us felt thick with everything that had accumulated since. I spoke first. "I'm not here to argue about the HR meeting," I said. "I'm not here about Donovan or the board or professional conduct policies. "Then why are you here?" she asked carefully. "Because I watched you lower those blinds tonight," I said, "and I realized something. You've spent 3 years building walls so that no one could get close enough to hurt you again. And somewhere in the last 4 months, without meaning to, I got close anyway." Her jaw tightened. She looked at the window. "That was a mistake," she said quietly. "Was it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, Elena, the mistake isn't that we got close. The mistake would be letting fear make the decision for us. You don't understand what's at risk." "I understand exactly what's at risk," I said. "My position, your reputation, everything you've rebuilt since him. I understand all of it." I paused. "I'm still here, at midnight, standing in your office, making my position very clear." She was quiet for a long moment. Her hands were flat on the desk beside her, pressed down, the way she pressed them down when she was holding herself very still on purpose. "I don't know how to do this," she said finally, so quietly it was almost just breath. I used to know how to let someone in without calculating the risk first, without waiting for the moment it goes wrong." She looked at me then, directly, and her eyes held something raw and undefended that I had only glimpsed once before, through the glass, just before she lowered the blinds. "He didn't just take my work. He took my ability to believe that I was worth being chosen. Without an agenda." The words settled into the room like something fragile being set down on glass. I crossed the space between us slowly, stopped close enough that she would have to choose, to step back or to stay. She stayed. "I'm not choosing you because of what you produce," I said. "I'm not choosing you because of your competence or your standards, or your flawless quarterly projections." I looked at her, the tired eyes, the loosened hair, the hands that were trembling slightly against the desk. "I'm choosing the version of you that laughs for 3 seconds and then catches herself. The one who approved my leave request without asking why. The one who stood in a stairwell in a rainstorm and almost told me the truth." Her breath came out slowly, unsteady. "You noticed all of that," she whispered. "I notice everything about you," I said. "I have for months." She looked at me for a long, searching, devastating moment, and then, slowly, like something that had been held under pressure, for a very long time finally releasing, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against mine. Her hands came up and held my face, gently, like she was deciding whether to trust the ground beneath her feet. "I'm terrified," she admitted against the small space between us. "I know," I said. "So am I. That doesn't bother you?" "It means it's real," I said. "That's the only kind worth being afraid of." We didn't make any grand declarations that night. We sat on the floor of her office, which, looking back, feels like exactly the right place for 2 people who had spent months being perfectly composed to finally come undone. She had her back against the desk. I had mine against the window. Our coffee had gone cold between us. The city glittered quietly beyond the glass, indifferent and beautiful. We talked until 3 a.m., not about work, not about Donovan or HR or professional boundaries. We talked about the things people talk about when the walls finally come down. Families, fears, the specific kind of loneliness that finds you in the middle of a successful life and makes no sense at all. She told me about her mother, who had taught her that excellence was the only reliable form of self-protection. I told her about my father, who had spent his whole life being reliable for everyone else and forgotten to be happy. At some point, she laughed, really laughed, at something I said about my disastrous attempt at cooking during my first year living alone. It lasted longer than 3 seconds this time. She didn't catch herself, she just let it happen. I decided quietly that I would spend a considerable amount of time making her do exactly that. The following week, she requested a meeting with Donovan herself. I didn't know she was going to do it. She didn't tell me in advance, and I suspect that was intentional, because if she had told me, I would have tried to go with her, and she needed to do this alone. Not out of stubbornness. Out of something harder and more important than stubbornness. She needed to prove to herself that she could stand in a room where her integrity was being questioned and not disappear. She told me afterward briefly, in the same quiet tone she used for everything that mattered, that she had been transparent about the nature of our relationship, that she had proposed a formal reassignment of my direct reporting line to eliminate the conflict of interest, that she had presented it not as a confession but as a professional solution, Clean and documented, and entirely her initiative. Donovan, apparently, had respected it. I stood in her doorway and listened to her deliver this information with the same composure she brought to quarterly reviews. Then I said, "You didn't have to do that alone." She looked at me evenly. "I know," she said. "I wanted to, and I understood. For Elena, that was the difference between being saved and being strong. She didn't need rescuing. She needed to rescue herself, with someone standing close enough to catch her if she fell. I could do that. I was good at that. 3 months later, I was no longer on her direct team. I was, however, very much in her life. She still took her coffee black. She still had opinions about slide alignment that bordered on the spiritual. She still went quiet in rooms full of people and loud in rooms with just the two of us, which remained, as far as I was concerned, the best possible arrangement. But she had stopped pressing her hands flat against surfaces to keep herself still. She had stopped calculating the exit before she walked through the door, and sometimes, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary evening, she would look at me across a room with an expression so unguarded and warm that I had to remind myself to breathe. She was still impossible, in all the ways that had never actually been the problem. She was precise and demanding, and she corrected my grammar in text messages, which I found both infuriating and deeply endearing. She pushed me harder than anyone I had ever worked with or loved, and she did it because she believed, quietly, fiercely, without ever quite saying it directly, that I was capable of more than I gave myself credit for. That, I realized, was never coldness. That was always care, the midnight office, the red pen, the impossible standards and the trembling hands and the 3 seconds of laughter she hadn't meant to give me. It all led here to something real and chosen and worth every terrifying moment of uncertainty along the way. If this story moved you, if you believe that the right person doesn't make life easier, they make it more worth living. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.